Welcome to Nomadic Diaries, the podcast for expats and nomads exploring what it means to belong in our globally mobile world. I'm Megan Norton-Newbanks, your co-host for the Belonging Project series with Doreen Cumberford, and today we have Patrick Kadian, who has so many letters behind his name, which showcases just how wonderfully trained he is as a multi-skilled therapist. He has lived and worked in several countries and joins us from Thailand in this episode.
So Patrick, you've lived as an expat for many, many decades. And, I imagine that you, like most of us, have had an evolution of this experience, and that all of your journeys across the continents have evolved in terms of your understanding of this word, belonging. Can you tell us a little bit about your background and how belonging fits in?
Sure. You know, it's interesting. I didn't grow up as an expat. I'm not an ATCK. I grew up in a small town outside of New York City, um, and lived in the same place for 18 or 19 years. And I didn't launch off until I joined the Peace Corps. And when I think about my relationship with the concept of belonging over the years, it really has evolved. So for whatever reason, I kind of know what the reasons are. I had a childhood that wasn't always easy. And I think one of the reasons why I enjoyed living abroad was part of the sense of being somewhat apart.
Yes.
I thought I could be somewhat more effective sometimes by being a little bit separated, and using that separation sometimes to be able to highlight different ways of doing things, and to, despite my youth, take somewhat of a leadership position only by seeing things a little bit differently. And just neurologically thinking about how I was feeling, I felt more comfortable without having a lot of the cultural expectations that I grew up with. And I felt it to be quite free.
Would you, under any circumstances, call that baggage? And when you talk about that separation, are you referring to mental ideas that you've brought with you that you would prefer to leave behind?
So the way that I think of it now, and there's certainly nothing I had understood at the time, right? So when I went abroad, I was going abroad with a degree in agricultural science, in organic agriculture. And so I was doing agricultural extension work. The so I didn't really have a background in mental health, but as I was thinking about being an effective leader, as when I was studying for my MBA, it caused me to reflect on what had been happening in my life. So the point is that I just felt a bit more comfortable because that separation just never felt that I was going to have that sense of rejection that I had when I was growing up as a child. So without that sense of closeness can sometimes feel threatening to people, depending on how you grew up. So it is baggage that I had taken along with me, but it was unrecognized baggage, that I was taking along, things that were in my pockets rather than things that were put into the overhead compartment. And so I think it had been an advantage of mine to be able to feel perhaps more comfortable than a lot of other people had being abroad, because I felt particularly comfortable being somewhat foreign. That
Mm.
changed. That sense of belonging, and this sense of belonging apart, um, was really very good for me for a very long time. But as I grew older, it became apparent to me that actually I wasn't feeding this important part of me, this part of me that needed to feel a closer sense of intimacy and belonging, as I understood it at the time. So when I had gone into this kind of work, I had not considered actually ever having a family. And then later I realized that actually, even if I wanted my work to be successful, I was going to need to feed that part of me.
Yes.
And um, and so I've started to feel really comfortable with other people, with
Mm.
now with my wife, and starting that family. So then I wasn't, and then I felt an interesting sense of relief as I started to feel this new sense of belonging. Again, this was not a time in which I had been aware really of mental health. At this time, I was an expert in agricultural science and in agribusiness by that point. And so again, still hadn't leaned into mental health. When I started to understand it differently, Doreen, is when I had children. And I noticed that when I would take my son to the playground, how he had a real need to all of a sudden start to interact with other people. Um, Even at times, early in the morning, we'd be off going to a park, and I really hadn't had enough coffee, and uh, and I was out, uh, and I'm sorry, and meeting other people. And I felt very comfortable being a part, as we had discussed, but my son needed to be a part of a group. And it was just then, just when I started to read about parenting books and things of this, to notice that, well, actually, a lot of other humans have a different feel for what belonging is like, and that I was going to have to take some adjustment, realizing who I was, but adjust as well to make sure that my son was going to be able to cultivate a sense of belonging abroad. So it went from being a real asset in the beginning to being somewhat apart to then noticing that actually I needed to have a stronger sense of belonging and fulfilling that. And then finally noticing that, the way that I find meaning or the way that I feel comfortable with people isn't the same way that everybody feels comfortable with people. And I was going to have to be aware of that in order to create a sense of belonging for my family as we moved from place to place to place.
And welcome to Megan Norton-Newbanks, who is our co-host in this series, The Belonging Project. Hi, Megan.
Hey, Doreen. Hey, Patrick.
Hey, Megan, so good to see you again.
Yeah, Patrick, amazing. You are so knowledgeable of so many different frameworks, and you have a lot of certifications. And I'm wondering if you can share how do the mental health challenges of expat life, the constant adapting to new environments, whether it's the macro level of nation state or even the micro level of maybe a neighborhood, affect one's sense of home and belonging.
So, when I think about mental health and a sense of belonging, I tend to think about primary parent and I think about children. And what I mean by that is um, it's a challenge as we go from place to place to place to get that sense of belonging. And we know that it's a big challenge for the trailing spouse or the primary parent in the sense that they don't have a role defined for them. The working spouse goes to their office or goes to the field, whatever it is that they're doing. They have a role that's defined. The kids, they also in most cases, sometimes they're homeschooled, but they do have a student identity, and they have often a friend group that they get to be a part of. And the trailing spouse doesn't have that. So it can be a challenge for them. And I think that challenge to their identity and their sense of belonging might be at the root of what we see for some of the challenges that we see with expat children. Not that it's the parents' fault, but it's one of these challenges that we are bringing into our home as we go from place to place. That we see that the kids tend to suffer a higher rate of rather emotional abuse or emotional neglect as a result of this. And so that makes a sense of belonging, perhaps at home, a little bit more of a challenge. So I think of it when I think about mental health and a sense of belonging. I think the more that we're able to do to give parents a sense of belonging with each other, legitimacy in the sense of a role of being able to be the primary parent as a sense of identity amongst other people who also have that identity, that will have this kind of knock-on effect to be able to help build a greater sense of belonging for the children at home and even at school. Because, if there's a healthier environment, well, I think I'll leave it at that.
So, I don't know if you can give us an example, but I can give you an example. When we arrived in Saudi Arabia, I'd lived in the Middle East. I had already a fairly good grasp of conversational Arabic. So I thought, oh, I can go out and I can figure this out. Um, and when I arrived to the tiny, tiny compound called Ras Tanura, which is on the Arabian Gulf, there was probably 500 people on this compound, and it was next to an enormous chemical plant that my husband and his colleagues were frighteningly tinkering with very dangerous chemicals. And I thought, oh, I've got this, I'm prepared. I know how to be around people who are in abayas, etc., etc. The difference between the reality and my memories of living and my experience of living in the cosmopolitan city at that time of Dubai and going into this tiny isolated community with a 2-year-old, 3-year-old was vast. And I would say that was one of the wonkiest times for my mental health.
Mm-hmm.
I felt
Yeah,
ungrounded. So can you speak to more about that feeling of floating and not being grounded, please?
Yeah, I certainly can, and I think I'll take a leaf from your book here and say that I had a similar experience when I had gone from having uh, a well-defined great position in Indonesia, where I was the primary breadwinner, and then I was switching with my wife when she was going to be the primary breadwinner in Ukraine. So Indonesia, we had a beautiful house, we had a nanny, we had a pool, and we had Indonesian weather. It was very nice. And then we
Yeah.
moved over to Ukraine, where we did not have such good weather. We went there in the winter, um, and it was the first time for me to be, primary parent. And we arrived and we were picked up in a Lada, which is, the kind of like a Russian, not
Land
great
Rover.
car. Yeah, kind of a smaller version, in fact. Not a completely sober driver, and with the snow falling and a lot of our bags, and we arrived at this long this tall like apartment building. That electricity was out and the guy's back was bad, and so I had to bring up my all of the luggage to the seventh floor on and bring it up
Mhm.
there. But that was nothing compared to what the adjustment was going to be like for when my wife left, who was traveling 75% of the time, and I was left for the first time with my 2-year-old son, and I didn't have anybody.
Mhm.
I had no Ukrainian.
Mhm.
I had some survival Russian. I did run projects in Russian previously, so I was able to speak somewhat. But she was gone a lot. I had a small child. I had no sense of identity in the sense of that I was this man bringing home a good amount of money. I was
Yeah.
somewhat, frankly, embarrassed sometimes to be able to explain what I was doing, because there wasn't a sense of legitimacy for a man, particularly in that environment at that time, to be the primary caretaker. Um, and so that wasn't easy in making friends. And so that was really, and again, this was before I started studying mental health. So it was really unmooring for me, and was definitely a difficult time. And it was what planted the seed to what the kind of work that I'm doing now, to be able to try to bring a sense of identity, for parents that that are fully engaged in the role of being a parent.
Mm. So this is very meaningful for you, and I would imagine, is it healing? Does it feel healing to be working in that space?
Well, I'll tell you, even the training, what I didn't realize when I was starting to do that, right? So I had worked in hypnosis, I had done hypnosis as part of it, but I've also trained in ACT and ACT for adolescents and DBT, and taken an ICF, child and adolescent development and parenting certification. And so as you go through these kinds of in the trainings, it's necessary for you to be able to process some of these things if you're going to learn it well.
Mm.
You have to lean into that. So, yeah, that was definitely healing as I came to understand, not just what my experience as a parent was, but maybe why I had that sense of comfort in the beginning of being, of belonging apart, and how that would be a different experience for my children. So all of those things were really healing for me. And going through that healing, I think, is what puts me in good stead as a professional now.
Absolutely. You've lived it, you've walked it, you slept it, you've eaten it. It's in our genes, right? Megan.
Yeah, I'm curious, could you speak more about the cognitive behavioral therapy? That's a mouthful of like what I'm curious, how do you even approach that with a client or a family? I'm very unaware of hypnotherapy practice. Can you give some 101 on
So
that?
yeah, sure. So it depends on which avenue people are coming to reach me. If they're coming to me through the avenue of the expat dad, that's a different point of view. If they're coming at me, or if they're coming and reaching me through the expat hypnotherapist, they come with the expectation of hypnotherapy.
Mm.
And hypnotherapy, as the way that I work with it, and the way that I understand it, well, first, let me disabuse some of the people's ideas. Some people, when they realize that as the expat dad, that I'm also a hypnotherapist, they were like, "Oh, great, you can hypnotize my kids into eating broccoli." And I'm like, "Oh, wow, I wish I could." But that's really not that's not the way things work. And under no circumstance do I at all ever take control, or do people start to talk about things that they don't feel comfortable talking about. I can't get any people's PIN numbers. I really have tried. No, I haven't tried. And none of those things really are available to me. What is available to me through hypnosis and working together with cognitive behavioral training or therapy, as I do it, or acceptance and commitment work, or dialectical behavioral work, all of those things are really just kind of pushing on this idea almost of mindfulness, because
Yeah.
what this allows you to do in hypnosis is it's working with the autonomic nervous system, which often is what's also what's working with mindfulness. And the way hypnosis tends to work is what we're really doing. So the autonomic nervous system, for 101, is dominated through this kind of fight or flight idea, or the rest and digest. And what happens with hypnosis is you really are pushing down on the rest and digest.
Mhm.
And as a result, you can't really you can't really activate the fight or flight. So you can talk about things that can be difficult for people without activating that. You can also have access when you're in the rest and digest kind of state. You have access to your creativity and to your memories more. And so you're able to integrate a lot of things. The long and the short of it is that within that state, within that very relaxed state, you're also able to bring people to experience bodily things that they're not able to experience just cognitively. So what do I mean by that?
Mm.
What I mean is if you talk about something that's difficult and people are staying in their defensive mode, or they have that fight or flight response, they can't feel safe thinking about doing some things differently. And that's something that's controlled within your autonomic nervous system. You can talk about it all day long, but the rest of your body isn't going to feel safe until you go through either experiencing it in real life and coming across to the other side, being safe through some kind of exposure, or you can do this hypnotically as well. And there's a lot of change where you can do once you understand that. So you can think of it uh, as a deep sense of mindfulness, or you can think of it as a way of being able to do kind of exposure therapy without actually having to be exposed. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you for that lesson in different techniques. And it brings me to another question of, do you find then correlation between when expat families are moving and are in that state of transition, that you know which technique to use, or do you even bring up a technique? Do you just perhaps say, this is very common for expat families and high mobility transitions, and this is something you're navigating because of that. Yeah.
Mm.
So, you know what I would say? Most of the people that I have seen have been people that were in the beginning of their transition to a new country, or they've been there for a while and are somewhat stuck, right? So I'm not usually in the state, although I think of one client in particular right now who's getting ready to move. Um, and so I think we end up using mindfulness,
Yeah.
potentially more than hypnosis. And I'll be really specific about what I mean about that. Sometimes you can see that people are being trapped in some of their thoughts of worries or catastrophizing, or about what's going to be coming. Yeah. Or catastrophizing what it means that they're going to be losing. That's just as an example. As, and
Sure.
that it makes it much more difficult for them to embrace what's going to be coming, or even to be able to let go in kind of an organized and meaningful way of their experience that they're letting go of. So I tend to use more of the mindfulness techniques to work with some of the thoughts that are coming up, to not hold them so tightly, and just be
Mm.
like, okay, you can allow that thought to be there, and other thoughts can come in. So other thoughts about the area that you're going to be going to. How exciting is that? Um, or uh, or gratitude for what you had experienced. But also, being able to deal with some of the emotions that are coming up so they don't tend to overwhelm you. But these are things that I find specific to the clients. And while it informs me their expat experience, it doesn't always dictate what's going to be showing up for them. Does that make sense?
Mm. Absolutely. Yeah. That makes perfect sense to me because we're all on our own journeys. And
Yeah,
I can really resonate with this because part of my what I would say moving from woundedness to wisdom is the way I frame it.
I like that.
was when I moved back from Saudi Arabia, and I had been certified as a coach, oh, I don't know, 20 years before that. So maybe 30 years, no, 20 years before that. Um, and these practices and these thoughts and these ways of being can be programmed into our lives for a certain period of time. But when you go back and you review and you build on it, you have to grow with it. And that's why I would say it was absolutely the worst time of my life in some respects, but the most fantastically creative, like you said, moments, because you have access to creativity. You have access to all the sensorization that you're experiencing. You have access to the ideas of the tastes and the smells and the sounds, and you can make it a much better journey, I think, when we just pay attention to all of that. So I love what you said, Patrick.
I also think perhaps like I can like to speak specifically to how hypnosis can help. It's always important for us to be able to eat well, to sleep well, to do our exercise, to make sure that we're belonging and to be able to have active stress management. These things are things that I always talk to people about. And hypnosis can help with almost along all of those things. Just the idea sometimes of people when they're really, really tense, being
Mm.
able to bring and remind their body that they can relax. Sometimes that does an enormous amount of work.
Oh, yes.
Hypnosis around sleep,
Soothing.
doing some sleep hypnosis
Mm.
as well as with some sleep hygiene. Hypnosis around eating, noticing those urges that one has to eat food that might be really unhealthy and to be able to really notice that and to make a decision to do something different is something that hypnosis helps with. Um,
Mm.
so, just sleep, nutrition, active stress management, those things really can be addressed through hypnosis. But those are particular kinds of techniques that one uses to be able to explore these ideas under a really relaxed state, to be able to realize that you actually do want to do things a little bit differently and you have the capability to do things a little bit differently. And all of those other thoughts that you're having that says, no, I don't think I could live without maybe that donut or so, that mid-morning donut because that's what makes me feel okay, or the cigarettes or the drinking or anything else that kind of gets in the way of your health and your mental health. These things can help.
So what I hear you saying is that a lot of the process or a lot of the results of hypnosis is a sense of wholeness that descends on us, correct?
Yeah, and self-efficacy. Sometimes when you're able to really like relax and not have all of those thoughts derail you, when all of those kinds of emotions derail you, and you're able to do that because of hypnosis, you're able to engage with that more. You can be like, oh no, actually, I can do this. Of course, I can do this. That makes sense. And then you're just convinced in a way, and your body is convinced in a way. That's that part. People think hypnosis is about, like the brain. It's largely about what your body can experience differently because it's affecting your autonomic nervous system.
So this brings up the idea of trust,
Mm.
because I think that most people's resistance to hypnosis can be number one, a lack of information, a lack of understanding, and a lack of trust. Can you speak to the part of belonging that trust has to play?
Hmm. Good
Because
question. Never thought.
if I really am struggling with my belonging and I'm coming to you, pretend for hypnosis, where does trust fit into that relationship?
So there always needs to be trust between the hypnotherapist and the client, of course, right?
Yeah.
Particularly because hypnosis is steeped in a lot of um,
Voodoo.
Yeah, a lot of voodoo, right? Because it is one of the earlier interventions for
Mm-hmm.
for mental health. And so it comes from this idea of mesmer and animal magnetism. And, it's not helped by um, stage hypnotists, which who are
Right.
entertaining, but they're doing something very different that has to do with selection and a lot of different issues that are there, and they really are entertaining. And so, if people kind of get to know you and they're able to talk to you and they have an idea that will actually, and actually, if you experience it once, you realize you're not really losing control. People, most of the time, if there's anything, they're like, am I really hypnotized? And then
Mm.
sometimes they can hear the recording. I'm like, oh, okay, no, things did go a little bit differently than I remember. Or, oh, that was 45 minutes. It seemed like it was 7 minutes, and so this kind of time dilation can show them that they've been hypnotized. So anyway, the main thing is that there's trust between the hypnotherapist and the client. But in terms of trust as well and connection, um, a little bit of trust in oneself that you're able to do things differently, that you're able
Mm.
to connect with that part of yourself
Mhm.
that's there, and a lot of self-trust that, well, actually, I've done things like that before, or I know I don't need those other things, and I can do things in the way according to my values. Um, uh, and that I can trust myself to do that. Hypnosis can help with that sense of self-trust.
Mm.
In building, I do work a lot with parents in a different aspect. And I don't tend to bring hypnosis can come into it with permission and with a lot of
Sure,
education beforehand, because
sure.
people are coming to me for parenting advice. Like, they come with a different expectation than, they say hypnosis. What are you doing? Dude? Put the watch away. I don't actually have a watch going back and forth, but
Uh,
yeah, exactly. There's all these ideas. Um, but the idea of building trust and connection within the home is a lot of what I'm working with on a regular basis. And that's really connecting with their sense of values. And most of the time, parents want to be supportive parents. That tends to be a value that shows up time and time and time again with the kinds of parents, at least, that select to come with me. And being able to be able to support them and being supportive parents also builds a sense of trust at home when they're able to validate the emotions of their kids, when they're able to co-regulate with their kids, when they're able to manage themselves and their emotions well enough to be able to address some, problems that might be persisting within the household. So, you create a sense of trust in the family that actually my mom or my dad, they aren't looking to control me. Um, they're looking to be able to create an environment where I can grow somewhere. It's not, listen,
it's not
teenagers
obvious.
aren't going to think this way, yeah. But
Right.
but there's somewhere there that if they feel a sense of safety, feeling a sense of support, and you help parents to build that sense of trust, as you were
Mm.
saying, that builds a sense of belonging as well. So yeah, trust
Thank you.
within the hypnotherapist client relationship, trust for people within themselves to be able to connect with
Hmm.
themselves, and then
Yeah.
trust that they're going to be able to building a supportive environment at home that makes that kind of safety and trust possible for the kids.
Wow. Well, that's a great answer. Thank you so much for elaborating on the relationship between trust and hypnotherapy and how it can build that sense of belonging. Thank you. For me, this has been a very specific episode on a topic that tends to be treated like woo-woo. And so I am very grateful. Megan, do you have any other questions for Patrick?
Well, I would agree with you, Doreen, that it's very concrete in an abstract mental health kind of space that you've brought clarity on. And so I appreciate that. And the other angle that I think is unique that you're bringing into our series is that you're prioritizing how do you belong to self,
Yeah.
regardless of physical location, and prioritizing inward looking and that peace and reconciliation with self, that you can belong anywhere because you belong to yourself. And so I think that's a beautiful contribution to our series. And my question for you is, what is one thing that you're doing in this season that you are belonging to self?
So I'm constantly working on my ability to be able to um, go through the ups and downs of life and expat life in a way that where I'm showing up the way that I want to be. And so I do concentrate on those areas that allow me to do that, allow me to be a bit more centered, to be either in wise mind, as some people put it, or in the zone of tolerance more often. So I'm able to behave the way that I'd like to be able to. And so I do pay daily attention to things like my nutrition and to my exercise, to what's hard for me sometimes is to make sure that I'm um, looking for belonging and reaching out to people outside of my family to be able to have a greater sense of community and belonging. Um, and even doing things like trying to get some sleep, you know, but also in addition to that, you know, active stress management or other kinds of ways I was talking about, being able to not let my thoughts overwhelm me or hook me or let my emotions overwhelm me, and just be aware of what's going on. Because you know, I'm a 70s guy. So, you know, I was born in the 70s. We were not raised with the concept of mental health. And it's certainly a new idea of mental health and being, you know, that kind of self-mastery, being a masculine value. That's a new one, but it is being more and more accepted. So I would say that all of those things that I'm doing, um, you know, along these things to be able to be healthy, to stay in the wise mind, to stay in this window of tolerance, is what I'm doing to connect to myself. So, because when I'm able to do that, then I'm able to connect authentically with other people
Mm,
well, uh,
mm.
and hopefully build communities for other parents.
Well, we really appreciate the fact that it is late at night in Thailand, and we honor and respect your genius, your brilliance, your training, the education, and the practice that you put into this daily, and for being such a wise counselor in this area. Thank you for everything that you do for expat families, and thank you for appearing with us on Nomadic Diaries, The Belonging Project. Megan?
Yes, thank you, Patrick. It's been a really calm episode. I feel even my own emotions have been regulated in listening to you. So I can't imagine having a session with you, how refreshing and renewing it can be. So thank you for sharing, like Doreen said, your wisdom with us.
Well, thank you both. It's wonderful to see you both again. Eventually, I'm going to have to see you all in person again. But, you know, for today, Zoom and
I'm
this
coming to
wonderful,
Thailand. Coming to
you
Thailand.
have to come by. I'll show you the elephants. I've shown, did I get to show you the elephants? Yeah, we won't go into that, Megan.
Next time.
Anyway, next time. Good to see you all. And thank you for having
Thank
me.
you. Thank you, Patrick. And for now, for Nomadic Diaries, it's sayonara, ma salama, and hasta luego.